Good evening. Welcome to the City of Murfreesboro Planning Commission. It's March the 7th. We do have a quorum present tonight, so we'll proceed. First item on the business of our agenda is to approve the minutes of the February 1st Planning Commission meetings. Any corrections from staff? Any comments from the Planning Commission?
Yes.
With no corrections, we'll approve those minutes. Next item is the consent agenda. First item is the North Church Subdivision Section 1, final plat for 3 lots on approximately 8.07 acres, zoned OG, RS15, CH, within the GDO and the BPD overlay districts located on North Medical Center Parkway, North Church Street developer.
No questions. I move for approval.
Have a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Next items are public hearings. First item is a zoning change request to rezone approximately 97.4 acres along Warrior Drive to be rezoned from PCD, approximately 31 acres, and RS15, approximately 64.4 acres, to Commercial Highway. Wendell Atkinson, applicant. Where Ms. Ely, I see you down. I was looking down here for you, and you're over here. I'm sorry.
That's
We're
right.
ready to go.
Thank you, Chairman Young and Planning Commission members. Our first public hearing this evening is to consider rezoning property that's located along the eastern side of Warrior Drive, extending north of Riverdale High School all the way to New Salem Highway, or Highway 99. If you take a look at the map, the areas that are shaded, both orange and blue, are included in this area being considered for rezoning. The properties themselves are zoned RS15, Single Family Residential District, and PCD, Planned Commercial District. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the property to the south that's zoned RS15 is the location of Riverdale High School. Interstate 24 runs along the edge of the properties to the northeast. Warrior Drive bounds the properties on their western side, so the properties are located east of Warrior Drive. The properties just across Warrior Drive are zoned RM16, which is Multifamily Residential District, and CH, which is Highway Commercial District. And just south of those two RM16 and CH zone properties are properties zoned RS15, Single Family Residential District. This application was made by the owner of the property that's shaded blue. That blue property is zoned both PCD, Planned Commercial District, and RS15, Single Family Residential District. The portion of the property that was zoned RS15 was zoned such when it was annexed as an interim zone. Because it was zoned for residential purposes in the county, it had a default zone of RS15. The property that's zoned PCD, or Planned Commercial District, was zoned such in 2001 when the Planning Commission and City Council considered and approved an application that would allow the property to develop as a golf training facility, which would include a driving range and pro shop. Soon after that PCD was zoning became effective, I think the plan fell through and nothing has happened at that time, so the property still remains vacant at this moment. So the representative of the owner of that property approached staff and asked to be for a change in the zoning so that they may be able to market it. They don't have a particular user in mind, but the golf training facility and driving range and pro shop are something that just hasn't happened in the past 10 years, and they don't think that they have a chance for that to develop as that in the future. The remaining properties at RS15 have been, of course, zoned RS15 since they've been annexed into the city. There is another property that's zoned PCD that's shaded orange, and it's sort of a triangular-shaped zoning. That property was also zoned PCD in 2001 for the use of a landscape nursery and garden center. That plan, too, fell through, and it was never developed, so it's currently vacant land. And so this was included as additional study area by the Planning Commission, including the RS15 properties. The properties are very limited with the 100-year floodway and floodplain of the Stones River. I've included a map that's in your packet, and I've got it on the screen now, and it shows the floodway of the Stones River and the floodplain. So development opportunities will be limited based on the location of those, and the type, and any development that would happen would have to, of course, be in line with our floodplain zoning. The Planning Commission should conduct a public hearing before considering changing the zoning of these properties. I'll be glad to answer questions either before or after the public hearing, and so would Mr. Adelot. Do you have anything to add at this moment?
Not right now. Thank you.
Okay.
One question. This was brought into the city in 2001.
It was brought in the city before then.
1987.
1987, okay.
Right, zoning was-
So it's been RS-15 for a long time?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Are you ready for the public hearing?
Yes, sir, if you are.
Okay. The next item is we will conduct a public hearing on this matter. If you're not familiar with our public hearings, you'll be invited to come to the podium and identify yourself and speak for or against this. We'll have 3 minutes unless you're a spokesman for a group. We'll address all the questions to the Planning Commission, and we will try at the end of the public hearing to answer all those questions, as our staff will be taking notes and working on that for you. So at this time, we'll open the public hearing and ask anyone to speak for or against this matter. Please come forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Larry Sims, Sims Realtors Auctioneers. Appreciate the opportunity to come in and talk to you about this property. Mr. Atkinson is signing right here to my right. He acquired this property by loaning some money on it, and unfortunately, the person couldn't pay for it, so he got it through that process of foreclosure and taking it back. So he didn't really buy it to intentionally do something with it. He's just like the mortgage holder and ended up with it. We've been wrestling with this property for quite some time. We realized that we've tried to work the system of bringing things in and see if we could make something work, and that's where the driving range came in. It kind of fell apart. This property is probably like some of the other properties, and I think maybe like Terry Haynes' property on Memorial, and then the World Outreach out there on 99, and then even Mark Pirtle was able to rezone his from PUD, Planned Development, to Highway Commercial. And the reason we know that, they wanted to do it because they knew it was a better chance of selling the property. So we've kind of got that same attitude that if we can get it rezoned, we've got a better chance of selling it. And we've been trying to sell it for quite some time. Even the rezoning it's a challenging, you've already heard that by the floodway and the flood area. The good and bad, probably the best part of the property is actually on the interstate side. That's the highest part. Sewer's over there, water's close by. So there's a good chance whoever buys it will probably develop it off of the interstate side and not off of Warrior Drive. I know it's a little bit more sensitive on Warrior Drive. Also, it looks like all these properties pretty well need to go together. And so we're trying to get that opportunity where everybody can kind of work together. It is a challenging piece of property. Fortunate enough, there's a lot of land there. I can remember when Target came into town and was buying their location over there on 96. You know, I said to myself and everybody else said, well, nobody will buy that and never do anything with it. Of course, they bought it, and look what happened to it. So when the right people come along, the plan's big enough, they can make something pretty attractive. And I think this kind of leans in that there. It's even a tougher piece of property. We know the flooding on it is one issue, but the real issue on this property is backing up from Stones River when it does flood. So the property itself drains pretty well as far as draining through it. It's just that when Stones River backs up, it backs into this property here. But we still think we've got a better chance of working something out if we can get the zoning, and the opportunity is there to do something. I don't know if you remember the late Joe Harrison. Joe did a lot of development around and everything, and he said that he tried to get his property rezoned because the big people, when they come to town, they didn't want to fight this zoning issue. They just seemed to go away and go somewhere else that wasn't already zoning. So we're kind of back in that same here. So, and we know the city is going to put a lot of requirements on it. The Planning Commission is going to put a lot of requirements on it. Even if we get a good potential buyer, it's going to have to jump through a lot of hoops. And so we haven't addressed, trying to do a whole lot outside of getting the rezoning. And I appreciate your time. If you had any questions.
Any questions?
I think we've got Bill Huddleston here. Bill's been working on this, like myself, several years. So if you got something you might want to address on the drainage, I think Bill can address that for you. Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak to this matter?
I'm Brent DeMint, representing the property at the intersection of 99 and Warrior Drive there. There's 10.7 acres there. It's in a trust with 10 of us. I see no need for our property to be zoned highway commercial at this time. Right now it's zoned residential. It also has the impact of a green belt due to having a green belt prior to the interchange being built there, and we couldn't agree with the state to come to terms on selling it, and so therefore we got to keep it in a green belt even though it has less acreage than what is in there. We're trying to farm that actively to keep it in the green belt. We do have it up for sale. I think I would think like you would. I do not need to pay extra money for it to let it sit there, so why do I want to pay the extra taxes? This doesn't make any sense to me. I think when it is sold, we'll be back here to talk to you about highway commercial, which is what I think it probably should be, probably what you think it should be, but I see no reason to take that 10.7 acres and include it in this lump to change the zoning at this time. I can see no advantage to me, and I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from with that. I've dealt with the city with the easements and everything out there to help develop this. I knew it was coming that way. We had to do it. Didn't agree with all that, and some of that still hasn't been settled with the easements. But that's where we are, and if we could get our price for it, we'd sell it today. But unfortunately, our economy doesn't let that happen the way we'd like for it to, and so we appreciate your consideration because of those facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeMint.
Chairman, just for clarification, Margaret, can you pull up the colored map, the blue and the orange sheet
Table.
that you had? His property is that one piece that toward the top that has the RS-15 on it that borders the dotted line going into the PCD. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. And Ms. Ely was moving the cursor over that parcel.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Was that added by staff or to this request?
The Planning Commission did consider this as an additional area to study. It wasn't requested by the property owners, so it was added as additional area.
But that's what we do a lot, is we look at the bigger picture, and then we always can scale back.
That's right. So we're just taking a look at it, and you're going to decide whether it's appropriate or not.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else like to speak on this matter? Anyone else? All right, we'll close the public hearing. Mr. Gilly, did you have a comment?
I did. I'm fine with the rezoning request as long as we cut out what Mr. DeMint is requesting. It's his property. He's not asking us to make that change now, and there's a perfect dividing line even on our colored map. That makes sense that he has to be brought back in at a later time. That's his prerogative, but it certainly I can see it's no benefit of him right now to have that brought in.
Ms. Ely, we have done this in the past, studied a larger area and fallen back or not rezoned the whole area. So we're being consistent if we choose to do this, or is that I want to know that. Is that?
I believe you do have that choice. I did advertise in the newspaper and in the mail-outs the entire area, so you do have the decision to scale back the area. You could not include additional areas that were not included in those notices, so you can't add any property, but you certainly can remove property that you see would be appropriate.
Okay.
And to clarify a little bit about this, I think we wanted to include it in the public hearing because we're looking at an area that may be changing the zoning. Well, that's what exactly what we're doing, changing the zoning, but we may be changing the uses. And as we often do, we want to study broad, recommend more targeted. At some point, and Mr. DeMint made it very clear, where circumstances different, he will be here probably looking for a rezoning. But the circumstances, which we could not know unless he shared his circumstances with us, help us to make a appropriate recommendation. At some point, it would be a very easy thing for us to consider. But I think that what we've established is this probably should be rezoned. And when the circumstances change and times are different, we will probably return to it with that expectation. And I think it's a good idea to discuss that tonight.
Sure.
And make a targeted recommendation to the council.
Mr. Aylott, I have a curiosity question. I have no problem with removing Mr. DeMent's parcel, but does zoning affect the greenbelt status?
I don't think that it does, but his situation is a little bit more unusual, as you heard him say, and you may not have really recognized the full extent of what he's telling you. Basically, the only reason he is on the greenbelt today is because he was on the greenbelt before the state acquired property from him,
Right.
and made his tract less than what it requires to qualify. And I think what he didn't say, but maybe he did, maybe allude to, is that if the zoning changes or other changes take place of his own making, then the property assessor and the state may take a different look at his circumstance.
Okay.
As long as he don't rock the boat,
Okay.
he can stay in that precarious position and stay upright. But if he rocks the boat and circumstances change, he may not be protected. And he doesn't want to take that risk at this point in time. And I can understand that would be a substantial financial result. Because not only would there be the increase in taxes, there would probably be the 5-year or the 3-year rollback of past taxes that have been paid to city and county.
Thank you.
I don't think, and I do agree with what we do in studying larger and scaling back as opposed to trying to go back piecemeal. But this is one of those situations where we don't need to be in the business of unnecessarily putting an additional tax burden on someone and causing a potential jeopardy to the use of property they have. And so I would move for approval of the rezoning request with the exception that the Dement property be removed from the analysis.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, motion passes. Our next item is a zoning change to rezone property, approximately 5.3 acres from PCD to CF for property located along South Church Street. Ken Knuckles, applicant. Ms. Ely.
Thank you. Again, our second public hearing this evening is to consider rezoning 5.3 acres of property that's located along the east side of South Church Street, also known as Highway 231. This property is shown in orange on the map before you, and you can see that it's 3 separate parcels. However, the ownership, I believe, is under one entity. The property was zoned PCD in 2008, which is Plain Commercial District. And there was a specific plan that was submitted and approved by you and Planning Commission, or you, Planning Commission, and City Council. Since that time, the development on the property has not taken place, and I think that you've heard me say before you several times last year that the PCD zoning, there's no likelihood that the property will develop under that approved PCD plan. So the owner came to staff with the wanting to know more information about changing the zoning, and staff presented 2 options. One, that they could either amend that Plain Commercial District zone, or they could rezone the property completely. The property owner made a decision to ask for you to remove the PCD zoning and convert the zoning back to its previous zone, which was CF, Commercial Fringe District. So the application before you is to consider zoning 5.31 acres to CF, Fringe Commercial District. They believe that the uses in that CF district will be able to, that they can market the property with the uses permitted in that CF district, so they did not ask for the more intensive CH zone, but rather have asked for the CF district. I did include an excerpt in your packages for the uses that are permitted in the plan development as they are today, just so that if you had any questions you could refer to that. The Planning Commission should conduct a public hearing, but I believe before you do, Mr. Aylott has a couple additional comments.
Yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. I sort of have a confession to make. When I prepared the staff comments, I had a typographical error, and it has to do with the zone history. I mentioned that the property was previously zoned RS-15, and it was zoned that manner with this annexation, and that is true. The property was actually annexed in 1996, and it came in zoned RS-15, and a portion of it was actually the part of the Indian Hills PUD. The front part of it was zoned to commercial fringe immediately after its annexation, so that would have been back in 1996. It remained zoned to commercial fringe until 2008, at which time it was zoned to planned commercial development. And the reason then was because they were wanting to add that small area that was part of the Indian Hills PUD that was not developed as part of the lots. It was just more of a about a 50-foot strip that they wanted to add. And at that time, it was very much the desire of the council that all applications came in as planned developments. So rather than rezone that portion from PUD to commercial fringe, the staff directed and suggested, pretty much at the will of the council, that we have them come in as a planned commercial development for the whole thing. So now I wanted to add that part of the zone history. It used to be, and for 10 years, it remained zoned as commercial fringe, the greater part of it.
Looking at this map, Mr. Adelite, the parcel next to it is commercial fringe also, is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is, both to the north and to the south. Actually, if you'll look to the parcel to the south, you'll notice that the back part of it is zoned PUD also. And that was the same problem with the two southern parcels that are part of this request. They had that same strip across the back of them.
Any questions before we open the public hearing? Okay, at this time, we'll open the public hearing and ask anyone to come speak for or against this application.
Good evening. My name is Ken Knuckles. I'm with Development Management Group here in Nashville, and we represent Innsbrook Commons, who are the current property owner of the subject property. And we're here before you tonight to ask for your consideration to take the zoning back to its previous CF zone. Back when this was rezoned back in 2008, there was different ownership involved. They had a completely different plan in mind at the time, and economic and other reasons caused those plans to fall through. Property's now under different ownership. They're wanting to go a different direction with the property. And the CF zone will give them the flexibility primarily to develop these in maybe 2 or 3 different parcels as opposed to a unified development, which is not what they would want to do at this point in time. Based on the interest they've gotten in the property. So I'm asking for your consideration tonight to allow that to happen. We have, 1st of February, started talking to the 10 of the property owners that immediately abut the subject parcel and presenting what our intentions were on the property and the reasons for our requests, and have had some really good discussions and feedback from those neighbors. And then on February 28th, we had an actual neighborhood-wide meeting that we held, and some of the neighbors showed up for that, and there's some good discussion and dialogue as part of that, too. So we believe we've gotten some pretty good feedback from the neighbors, and the ones more in particular directly adjacent to the property. So I'm here tonight to answer any questions. There's some other folks here that can answer some questions as well. So just ask for your consideration. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Knuckles. We may ask some questions here.
Okay.
Anyone else like to speak on this matter? Got a lot of audience out there.
Thanks for giving me a few minutes. My name is Craig Pierce. I'm a resident in Indian Hills. My property does not abut the property that we're discussing, but I am close by on White Cloud Trail. Okay? Several questions and comments, please. And I did have the opportunity, I'm sorry, I don't recall the gentleman's name, but I did speak to the Goodwill owner. I'm sorry, I don't recall his name. So he did answer quite a few of my questions, but I did have some initial concern regarding the existing real estate that's vacant in close proximity, namely the Food Lion just vacated there. There's several other several other pieces of real estate in the Kroger shopping center directly across the street. I have a concern, namely that if we have a real estate market in the commercial sector that's weak at this point, should some consideration be given for best use to use existing locations as opposed to building a new one? Since speaking to the owner, he shared with me that they looked at Food Lion. It's approximately 20% more square footage than what they need, their current need is, and that frankly, because of the configuration of the building, it's not suitable for a Goodwill operation. So I think, I certainly understand that point. But again, if it's possible to look at reconfiguring an existing structure, I think that should be given all due consideration. And I think that would be aligned with some of what Goodwill Industries does in regards to, they recycle instead of throwing things in the dump. Right, we reuse things. So again, why not use an existing structure as opposed to building a brand new one? Is my point there. So again, I just want to make sure that all due consideration is being given to use an existing structure, and obviously the economics of that have to work out as well. So, and I certainly understand that. Additionally, from an environmental standpoint, and when I think about runoff and things of that nature, we're going to lay in another big patch of asphalt as opposed to what's green today, and we have existing asphalt. Why not use it instead of creating more runoff into the environment? I think also a worthwhile point. The building looks very nice. Now, what was represented outside in the hallway, and I don't see it on display here, but I saw a very nice building. Looks like a nice plan, and I understand Goodwill Industries will provide jobs for the community. So, I certainly welcome them into the community. I just want to make sure that we're as best we can, that we're opting to pick the best, location for that. And I understand there's a need in the south end of Murfreesboro, perhaps. They're up on North Memorial. If the market dictates that a Goodwill can come down here, and if it can be a thriving business, by all means, welcome it into the community. Again, I just want to make sure that we have the right, that we've got the right fit. If the property does go into the proposed location, what was represented, which is not on display here, I was told that 1 to 3, and by the way, my background is in distribution. I'm not an engineer, not a lawyer, but my understanding is that 1 to 3 trailers will come in there per week. From a noise abatement standpoint, you think about the burden that's placed on the contiguous properties as far as the noise going in and out of there, all right? My understanding is those trailers will come in primarily during the middle of the day, and that perhaps on rare occasion there may be a trailer pulling in at 10 o'clock at night. I think it should be a matter of record that is the intention as to how this property is going to be used. And from a noise abatement standpoint, I understand that there's going to be a 3-foot berm with trees placed on top of the berm. Is that going to be enough of a buffer for the neighboring properties not to be impacted by the noise levels? And could that, if the noise levels are increased, could that theoretically depreciate home values? And frankly, it's not my home right there, but if those values go down, mine 2 blocks away goes down as well. So I want us to be very sensitive to the noise. And if it's possible, and I'm with UPS, completely different situation. We put up a 1.6 million square foot, 6-building distribution center in Louisville, certainly a much larger configuration than what we're discussing here tonight. But UPS, the neighboring properties, which was housing, we put up an 8-foot berm. And obviously a lot more trailer traffic going on in the middle of the night as well, but I want some consideration given to the noise. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Any other one like to speak? I see you, young lady.
Hi, my name is Mindy Bell. I live at 2910 Runnymede, and I'm actually one of the property owners that abuts up to this property. We all keep saying that it's going to be zoned back to what it was previously, and I guess I just kind of want to hit on the point that this was zoned commercial fringe and planned residential development, and that back part that's being the corner, the offset, our house is on the corner of that. And so the corner of that actually goes into our bathroom window. And so I'm just very sensitive to that area, and that I just want it to be a matter of record that I'm asking that they be very sensitive to that area. Also, the adjoining property, I have the overhead map. Where the line is basically on her back sidewalk. It is very close to her home. And I want the people that are developing this to keep that in mind as they set it up and as the traffic is going through there, because it will affect our property values. And I'm very sensitive to that. And they've talked about the drainage issue, and they kind of said, oh, we've got this great drainage going on there. We don't. And as they start developing the property, I just kind of wanted to make that a matter of public record that the drainage right now is not good. And if we get runoff into our yards more than what we have now, it's going to be way worse, because we can have a swimming pool sitting in our backyard for days after it rains. So I just want to make a couple of comments. I'm not opposed to it, but it's not going back to what it was 4 years ago. It's actually going back to commercial fringe, which is not the zoning that it was previously. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Jan Sutton. I live at 2914, directly beside Mindy and Marty. And as she said, the way the property line is, how they have it staked off now, is about 7 feet from the sidewalk where my kids have played for 8 years. We won't have a backyard. I just wish they would be respectful of giving us that 20 feet of landscape that we had 4 years ago. That we've had a backyard for 8 years, and now we won't. Excuse me. I'm not opposed to the development. I just want them to be mindful that we do live there, and that someone will always live there.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? I'm going to close the public hearing if there's no other speakers. Ms. Dadelot, Ms. Ely, we've had some good questions posed to us. Would you comment on what we do with site plan review and how the berm and noise and setbacks and drainage are going to apply to this?
Yes, sir. Be glad to. First of all, let me sort of step back. We had a. Was there something else?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
There was a neighborhood meeting where we talked with Ms. Bell. She came and a couple of her neighbors, and then she and her neighbors were, I think, very articulate, very able to impress upon me and my staff their circumstance with their backyards. I don't think Ms. Sutton was there, but her neighbor, Ms. Bell and Mr. Bell, were able to speak a little bit about their circumstance. And in fact, I've met them before with the original zoning. And I think that they are correct that they're going to be very close to the property. But I think that the development plan, and pretty much any development plan that this plan commission will review, will have the ability to place some conditions on buffers that will help to moderate the visible part. The visibility part is it can be improved with fencing, and not just a 6-foot, maybe an 8-foot fence, a little bit of berming, and the landscape materials. Something we talked about at length was which side of the fence the landscape materials need to go on. And one neighbor wanted one thing, and another neighbor wanted a different thing. And it had to do with how they really manage their own property. One has a dog, the other doesn't. And the one with the dog wants a bigger yard and would enjoy the fence because more on their side than the other. I think that the applicants were very attentive to that, and were listening very closely to what they were hearing in terms of how to work with the neighbors. Now, the circumstance of this property is that most of it will, by necessity, drain through the Indian Hills subdivision, right there in that corner, right there between Ms. Bell and Ms. Sutton. I think there's actually a storm drain that comes through there. We learned that with the original planning effort. And in the back area, there will be a necessity for a stormwater detention area. Just no matter what happens on this property, there will be a necessity for some sort of stormwater detention. And by the happenstance of the geography, it will be in the back. So the first thing, there will be a buffer, and then there will be a stormwater detention area. And it will be more than likely a detention area. I don't think it's going to be what we call a wet pond where there's water in it all the time. It will drain out. But it will be held back and drained through that pipe. With the draining, with the grading for it and the construction of the berms, there's going to have to be some care to make sure that they don't cause water to pool and stay on the properties over in Indian Hills, because there's already a little bit of a flat spot back there that gathers water. So I guess that's a long way of saying I think we are aware of the circumstances, but we're also attentive to watching the design. I did encourage the Bells to come and speak at the meeting tonight, because I wanted them to get it into the record that they've got a concern, let you folks who are making a recommendation hear their concerns, have some discussion on it, to help us gain an institutional memory, so that when the site plan comes back in, we will have the mental foresight, or mental presence, if you will, to discuss that at the site plan review stage. At the site plan review stage, you have the ability to place reasonable conditions on the plan. There will be a requirement for a buffer. I think it will be a type. Probably a Type C buffer. Is that correct, Ms. Ely, between a RS or a PUD and commercial fringe?
Yeah.
And that's going to be about a 15-foot minimum, and it can be supplemented with a fence. It will require evergreen and deciduous trees spaced according to the requirements of the zone ordinance. The stormwater element will help to add a little bit of space in between. The best buffer is distance, and this will add a little bit of distance to the back of those buildings. I don't think it'd be a good idea to see a massive berm back there. I think that would have a complication on the drainage that may not be good for the people in Indian Hills. But maybe a modest berm, particularly ones that undulate, so that there's some low areas that the drainage can come through. But that's something during the engineering stage we will take a hard look at. So I think that during the site plan review stage, with this discussion tonight, getting it into your memory, getting it into our memory, and into the applicant's memory, we should be able to help the situation and to address these concerns.
Mr. Keeley. As most of you know, I live in the area as well. In fact, I run on Runnymede every single morning of the week except for Sunday. She's nodding her head back there. She probably sees me some of the mornings, and their concerns are very valid. And I remember when this came up, when we rezoned it as the PCD, a few years ago, there was a reason we did that. And I know we've been relaxing some of the PCDs and PUDs in recent past, given the change in economic times, but I think given the concerns were brought, I really think it needs to be brought in as a PCD again, rather than just opened up as commercial fringe. So I cannot vote in favor of this.
Okay, we talked about drainage, we talked about noise. Did we talk about some concerns about noise?
Well, we didn't discuss that. I didn't discuss that very much. The number of trips is going to be very low with the Goodwill proposal. There will be trucks, but if they're daytime trucks, they're probably going to be the ambient noise levels will be considerable with the traffic over there on South Church Street. More than likely, the net effect of having a building constructed between the property and the street will improve the noise by just creating that noise barrier. And the truck traffic will probably be not noticed as much as the existing traffic on South Church.
Can this body put reasonable requests on deliveries for late night things such as dumpster dumping at 4 o'clock in the morning and things like that?
During site plan review, yes, you can. At this point, if we were looking at a commercial fringe, no, you can't. You can't place that kind of condition on a zoning application for commercial fringe. It might be possible to do that as part of a planned commercial development, but not as a commercial fringe.
Exactly.
During site plan review, you can place it as a reasonable condition for your standard site plan review. I will admonish you that that's pretty tough to monitor. And with a change in management at a place, that can change overnight, and we have to wait till there's a complaint before we find out about it.
Okay, I'm reviewing my notes. I want to address all the questions that were asked. We talked about noise, the berm, site plan review, drainage. I do know that this body consistently is one of the very top concerns is drainage on any piece of property. That's sort of the first rule in property development, is to make sure you don't put water on somebody else. And I think that we do look at the engineering studies, our engineers and the developers' engineers, to make sure that's happening, because that's a big no-no. Any questions over here, comments?
I mean, I have a question that Mr. Knuckles can probably answer, and I don't, whether it's an appropriate question or not, I'm going to ask it anyway. It sounds like that you have a user or a development that's close to coming to fruition. Is that a correct statement or a true statement?
That is correct.
Okay.
I mean, Goodwill's been mentioned here several times tonight, and they are looking at a little over 3 of the 5 acres. They're actually looking at purchasing their portion of the property and self-developing and being a long-term owner, which is a change in philosophy for Goodwill. I mean, a lot of people associate Goodwill with moving into second and third generation spaces. They have changed their business model greatly over the last few years, or have tried to, and a part of that is where they're actually becoming long-term neighbors and residents, as opposed to being short-term renters. So yeah, Goodwill is looking at purchasing a little over 3 of the 5 acres and self-developing that. Their hope is to come through, if we're successful in getting this rezoning in place, soon after that.
So there would be a portion of the property that they wouldn't be purchasing. Is that
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are not wanting to come under a PCD because of they don't want to have to go through that process, and that may not be a fair question. Is that a fair question?
Well, it is a fair question, and let's have some discussion on it. They came to me to discuss their desire to build the Goodwill building. And when I examined their plans, I detected right off that it was not sufficiently consistent with the approved plan for us to be able to approve it under the current plan. It would require a plan amendment or rezoning. They were looking at only a portion of the site. The remainder of the site would be impacted by their plan. So it would require either a comprehensive amendment to the plan development, not just a minor amendment, but a very comprehensive amendment, or rezone the commercial fringe. The advantage to the commercial fringe would be that it gives them a lot of flexibility, and they wouldn't be in the situation of having to devise a plan for Goodwill with the uncertainty of the remainder of the site, not knowing really what kind of a plan to devise, because they just don't know what they're going to do with it, who they're going to sell it to. If they had a user right now, it'd be real easy. So with that uncertainty, they felt that they wanted to pursue the commercial fringe alternative rather than the planned commercial development. So we explained the options, we explained the process. They opted to make the application as commercial fringe.
There was a reason years ago why, when these parcels were put together as the one big PCD, why we found it attractive, and I don't see any change in that tonight. None.
Okay. In fairness to, or in response, I guess, really to the comments that you made earlier with regard to the buffering and the drainage and all of those things, what was approved on the PCD plan before, specifically with regard to buffering, was a 20-foot wide buffer that went all the way across the back of these parcels. Within that 20 feet, there was a 3-foot berm with double rows of evergreen trees and other required plantings on that, with an 8-foot fence as part of that to screen that. That's what's been presented in our discussions to all the property owners that we've talked to throughout the process. There's been absolutely no change whatsoever to the buffering that was discussed with them prior and what was approved with the PCD. So while I completely understand their concerns due to the fact that their backyards are adjacent to this, whether this development goes through as it does now or it goes through sometime down the road as part of a PCD, it will be developed commercially, and those same buffer considerations are going to be made. The property is currently undeveloped property. There are probably drainage issues with it. With any undeveloped piece of property, you just have water running all over an undeveloped piece of property, versus having a specific plan in place where you've got building placement and grading for your parking lots and your stormwater, and all that's been engineered out, is clearly going to improve that situation. So my point being, whether this is PCD, whether it's CF, it's going to be developed commercially somehow or another. Those same considerations are going to be there. What this does is it allows the current property owner to sell his portion that Goodwill has an interest in developing, and that can be done ahead of time and not a part of some unified development that he's not really prepared to do.
You see, that's what I'm saying. I don't want this broken up into piecemeal like that. I like the idea of the way it was packaged together as a unified development. That's the part that I'm not wanting to see happen.
Okay.
How much area, what a rough percentage is the Goodwill going to take of this parcel? 2/3?
They're taking, I think, about 3.5 of the 5.5 acres, something along those lines.
Is the remaining area going to cause a problem for development? Is it going to be too small? Is it going to be adequate?
Well, it just depends, obviously, on however it's developed. At this point, all they have are discussions with certain tenants. Right now, we're showing on a conceptual plan about a 10 or 11,000 square foot multi-tenant building, which seems to be the highest and best use of what's left of the balance of the property. But again, that's obviously conceptual because they're not that far along with any particular tenant or tenants.
Any other questions? Any other questions from staff or Planning Commission? Mr. Pierce, we've closed the public hearing, sir. I just want to acknowledge you, but we can't let you speak again. It's procedure. No, we've closed the public hearing, sir.
It may die for lack of a second, but I move for denial.
Have a motion to deny. Is there a second? Mr. Gilley, you are correct. There is no second to that motion. Is there any other motion?
I mean, I'll make a motion that we approve as long as, Mr. Aylott, you feel like we have some assurance that we can go through the, when we see the site plan, that we can feel comfortable in putting the guidelines and restrictions in place that would make everybody here feel comfortable with that site plan, irrespective of there being one user or two users for these 3 parcels.
Yes, sir, I do. I'm mindful of Mr. Gilley's concerns, and to be very frank, I preferred a unified approach to it as well. But in evaluating the property, I have a lot of confidence that we will be in a position to be able to address the very concerns that I'm familiar with and have heard from Ms. Bell and her neighbors.
With that, I'm sorry.
Let me ask a question.
All right, go ahead.
If this is a PCD or commercial fringe, the buffer is going to be the same? Either way it goes? 20 foot with berms, fence, and greens?
I believe basically with a commercial fringe, it would be down to a 15-foot buffer. But either way, because of the stormwater, it will effectively be wider than that in terms of width. The PCD would require, if that was part of the plan, a 20-foot buffer, it'd be that much wider, a 5-foot wider. But either way, there'd still be a stormwater program in the back.
But follow up with what Mr. Young just said, as part of that site plan approval, we can request a 20-foot berm, can we not?
I think you can, and this is one of those unique areas where it is commercial right up against residential.
Right.
We generally try to see a transition of uses or some sort of natural buffers if we can. So I'm thinking that there is the ability to be more demanding because of that circumstance. We place our zone and our history places a high degree of protection to residential uses adjacent to commercial. So I think that as a condition of site plan approval, you can require additional buffering. I guess I'm telling you what the defaults are so that someone coming in on first blush would design to. On the other hand, I guess they're going to hear tonight that they're going to be expected to do a little bit more if they come in as commercial fringe.
If I can add this, we made a commitment when we started looking at this property, the property owner did, that the 20-foot buffer that was a condition or a part of or included with the PCD would be carried through on this. And what we've shown on any plan that we've done thus far is a 20-foot buffer identical to what was shown on the previously approved PCD plan. So I don't know if it's appropriate as part of your approval if you want to put that condition on the approval that it's approved with a 20-foot buffer, if that's done during site planning. But we would concede to a 20-foot buffer, regardless of, if it's CF or whatever it may be.
Just to clarify, as a commercial fringe, you can't make a conditional approval. It is commercial fringe or it's nothing.
Yep.
Now, as part of your institutional memory, you can just remember this real well when it comes back for site plan review. We're going to do our best to remind you.
All right, you confused me just a little
make
bit.
a condition of it.
You're saying that we can't make the condition now, but I'm understanding you say we can make the condition at site plan approval.
Yes, sir, that's what I'm telling you.
I just want to clarify that.
And Mr. Knuckles has gone on the record
Right.
publicly that that's what he intends to do.
Correct.
And that's where our collective memory comes into play.
Correct.
Vice Chairman Young, with that, I will make a motion that we approve, subject to all staff comments and comments that were made as part of this hearing.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Motion passes. All right. Thank you. Next item is a zoning change request to rezone approximately 93.67 acres located along Kimbrough Road from PUD to RS8, approximately 68.67 acres, and RM16, approximately 25 acres. Wilson Bank and Trust applicant. Ms. Ely.
Thank you, Chairman Young, Planning Commission members. Our third and final public hearing this evening is to consider rezoning property that's located along the south side of Kimbrough Road, which will be renamed to Veterans Parkway in the very near future. You can see in the map in your packets that the property is shaded both in a lavender and an orange color. And that indicates the two types of zonings for which the applicant has requested. The property is currently zoned PUD and is known as the Indigo Plan Development, Plan Unit District Development. The property that is adjacent, the properties that are adjacent to this along the eastern side are in the unincorporated area of Rutherford County and are zoned for residential and agricultural purposes. Properties to the west, you can see there's an area zoned RS15 that was recently rezoned from Plain Residential District to RS15, and that is along Armstrong Valley Road. There's also some property zoned PRD, which is a developing single-family subdivision. To the north, you can see that there are various single-family subdivisions located in both the city and the county. That green line on the map indicates the municipal boundaries, and so that will indicate to you what is within and what is not within the city limits. The property, as I mentioned earlier, is zoned PUD and was zoned such in 2008. Sounds like it was a popular year for zoning plan developments. The plan is indigo, and those of you who are on the Planning Commission and City Council at that time may remember the extensive study that we did before approving this zone change, because it was to allow a mixed-use development with new urbanism-type development. The buildings were close to the street, there were porches, there was a mixture of commercial, residential, and some office in one development. And we, of course, all had high hopes at that time, and we're excited about seeing something like that in our community. The property, as approved, has a density of 6.4 dwelling units per acre, and of course there are 93.67 acres in that property. Since that time, things in our world and community have changed, and the previous owner no longer owns the property. Now Wilson Bank and Trust owns the property, who I believe had the loan on the property, and due to circumstances, the bank owns the property now. So they're looking at a way to sell the property, knowing that the Indigo plan development, while ambitious and interesting, is a bit premature, and especially considering the location of the property, there's not a likelihood that this property would be developed in the near future. And then adding in, I guess, the economic circumstances, that would be even more difficult. So their request is to request that you rezone this PUD from PUD to RS8 and RM16. Now, the RS8 property area that they're requesting is 68.67 acres and is the bulk of the property. Properties that are zoned RS8 will allow single-family residential uses, and the lot size is a minimum of 50 feet wide with a 30-foot front setback, 20-foot rear, and a total combined setbacks of 15 feet, with a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet without rounding, so it could be 8,000 or above. Under the, if you look at the acreage, it looks like the property will likely be able to develop with 300 units under that RS8 zoning. The second part of the request is to rezone the property to RM16, which is multifamily residential district. That gives a density of 16 dwelling units per acre if it's over an acre. They're requesting for 25 acres to be rezoned to RM16, so indeed they could get 16 dwelling units per acre for a total of 400 dwelling units for the property. This property does have a couple, I guess, limiting factors on it, one of which is the capacity for sewer. At this time, the sewer capacity, I guess, is maxed out at 600 dwelling units, so unless there's some change to our existing infrastructure, then the maximum that this property can develop is with 600 dwelling units. There's also some wetlands on the property, which limit the construction significantly, and then there's some stormwater basins. So with the poor surface drainage, the wetlands, and the cap of 600 dwelling units, it's more realistic to anticipate that approximately 250 dwelling units, single-family residential dwelling units, can be constructed rather than the 300 I initially said, and that 350 multifamily units can be constructed as opposed to the 400 that I initially said, since there are those additional limiting factors. I believe there's some representatives of the applicant in the audience, so if you have any questions for them after the public hearing, they'll be glad to answer them. I believe Mr. Huddleston has been working on this with the bank and is familiar with the limitations on the property as well. But before you make a recommendation whether to rezone the property or not, you should conduct a public hearing, and staff would be glad to answer questions either before or after your public hearing.
Any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? With that, we'll open the public hearing and ask anyone to speak for or against this. Please come forward. Mr. Huddleston, are you going to have any comment?
He's just happy to be here.
He is getting paid. Last call for anyone wishing to speak on this matter. Close the public hearing. Ms. Eda, you said you had some more comments. Did you have some more comments after that?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. Mr. Adelot sometimes does. Nope, not tonight.
Well, the only comment I got is it was a wonderful plan. It took a lot to get the plan developed. We spent a lot of time working on it. We were excited about it, but we're awfully disappointed it didn't take place. Now that it didn't take place, it isn't going to take place. It was planned before its time for that property. And very frankly, there were things about this traditional development that were going to be problematic from a service delivery standpoint. I think that RSA will be better for us to be able to provide services to it. So I feel comfortable with the application.
It's truly one of those lemons to lemonade situations, given the status change of things. That I would move for approval.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. That concludes our public hearings, unless we have a surprise entry, which we can't do that, so. Ms. Daylight, are there any staff reports or other business?
No, sir.
No, sir.
With that, we are adjourned.